We are back, a new week. We're all still, I hope, respecting social distancing. And we've got a wonderful tour, a peek into a house of an incredible traveler, Tudor Clee, a lawyer by current profession, a designer by prior profession, and an incredible traveler. I want to see inside your house.
Hi everyone. Sorry, got someone just joining us here from EPS. Sure, man. So I'll get started. So I just told you before that unfortunately we got a little bit of renovation work going on here, but I'll just um, start off with a little tour. Um, so so these are some maps which I've got from a set from 1824, which shows how much of Russia Russia had in North America there for you, how big Mexico was. Um, but really interesting just to show the development, because I think 1824 is an important piece of time because it's when South America started breaking up, and then 1840 when the South America started breaking up. A lot of empires forming 1913. So I sort of wanted to have like empires I could study there. In terms of the super rare maps, this is actually the original plan of Auckland from 1840. Which they didn't make. It was considered to be too fancy. This is the Japanese map from when Japan was looking at which countries they're going to invade, including New Zealand. So basically a series of maps where they were educating, I think, Japanese school kids about the countries that effectively they were going to be taking over, but they call it the sphere of co-prosperity. In terms of the geopolitical art, what I wanted to do up here was to sort of show really important aspects of the Cold War, because I think from the travels, especially when you go around Africa or Asia, really anywhere, I think more people today are impacted today by the Cold War than anything else in history. Like that's actually a bigger issue for them, the fall off from the Cold War. So I found this in Tajikistan. It's the last Soviet space race poster before they lost the space race. Just an interesting one about Lenin. This is a Chinese poster from 1968 saying USA, get out of Africa, with a kind of ironic woman with a baby on the back. Soviet poster I found in a junk store in Tajikistan about inclusiveness, and a Vietnam War poster before the Vietnamese went into Soviet realism. But what I wanted to do is say, how do I get the American version of all of these geopolitical events? So I found the Time magazines from the same era that covered the same issues. It's like the space race, social inclusiveness, space race, youth. It's kind of funny because that's the American version of like the ultimate young guy, and it's actually kind of looks just like that dude. Like they seem to have a lot in common. This was really interesting where I gotta make sure I got the right guy. Patrice Lumumba was meant to be on the cover of Time magazine, and then the head of the UN died in a plane crash trying to solve the Congo crisis. So they took the original artwork, or used the original artwork, and put the UN Dirk Hammarskjöld's face on Patrice Lumumba's cover. So what I did is I've cut the original artwork out and then pasted it back on the Time magazine cover to sort of put Patrice Lumumba back, because that's all about anti-imperialism, which matches up with our African lady. Social inclusiveness with Muhammad Ali, and obviously Vietnam War. So yeah, a lot of, I go on about this for hours, all that stuff. Some other maps, which is just interesting. This is the only known copy of this map, which is the first one to ever show the flight distances around the world from New York on a Mercator map. So you can actually see the circles and get an idea that it's actually the same distance to, say, Ghana as it is to the north of Russia. And then I've kind of made a little display here about Nauru using their postage stamps to sort of show the history of it, because it's such a fascinating little country. Otherwise, I'm into underwater photography, so I've got pictures freediving there. In terms of the interesting artifacts, there were some things that I really went hunting for when I was traveling. these are from Venezuela. They're called Santos Malandros, and these are the kind of figures that people pray to, if they're a gangster. So these are real dead gangsters from the 80s. And people will be praying to the Virgin Mary statue, and then they'll pray to this dude here, Miguel, and then go out and do some crime and hope they survive, I guess. Another thing I was always really interested in was the Mayan ball game goal. And I'd been in Chichen Itza, and I was like, man, I'm just fascinated by it, because if you're playing the game and you kick the ball through there, the other captain gets his head cut off. And I thought, man, that'd be a cool thing to have around the house, if you're deciding who's doing the dishes and you're trying to play darts or something. And I'd actually seen a guy carving on the side of the road there. And I started Googling him 5 years later and found the guy's name, just contacted him through Facebook and using Google Translate, and had to make a full-size replica of the ball game goal. And I think he did an amazing job of it. In terms of some of my photography, these are pictures from Mauritania. Sorry about the mess. Of the guy and the fish. It's really hard to get these photos because a lot of these workers are from Senegal, and they're trying to get to Europe, and they don't want pictures of them to show that they've been working along the way. One of my highlights of all my trips was meeting the Sapeurs, who are these dudes in the Congo that, dress like French dandies. And then another picture from Mauritania that I just thought sort of showed a humanity, with the woman crossing her legs so she didn't get her feet wet. And then this old dude from Masai Mara guarding the coffee machine. So the photos in there. But what I want to talk about, this really interesting art form, something that people could look up, is Ghana posters. So these posters, this is about 6 feet tall, about 1.8 meters tall. And in the 1990s, you'd have people go out to the villages in Ghana, and they'd take a VCR, which for young people, a video cassette recorder, and a projector. And they'd get these local artists to paint the movie posters. But the problem is that they'd often never seen the movie. So like, this is Keanu Reeves, because the artist probably didn't really know what he looked like, so they thought it was close enough. And these are one of these things where some art collector went and discovered these, and now it's pretty much impossible to find the originals, because they're considered such a unique artwork. This one was actually painted over another poster, which I didn't realize until it was framed, but at some point I think we might pop it out and see if we can x-ray it or something. And here's another one. And this again shows this sort of muscle definition and the guns, which they really love doing on the posters because it attracted, people to go to the movies. But this really showed what happened when you don't watch the movie first. I mean, this is Tia Leone, of course, with the baseball bat and the handcuff, with some great muscle definition. And you can see that they've sort of smudged on some chesty on her, and then even the necklace is really poor quality compared to everything else. Another thing I really enjoy is finding the local craft and how to integrate it. So this is from Cabo Verde, and this unique fabric pattern from Cabo Verde sort of got some Islamic influence in there. And it's basically the national treasure of Cabo Verde is this pano de terra fabric. And they use it for everything there. You can wear it as a wrap, you can use it as a tablecloth. And I was trying to think what I could use it for. And so I contacted my Airbnb host and said, can you get me 100 meters of it, or 97 meters of it? And it's hand woven in this width. So the guy, best weaver on the island, made all of this, and I've just hung it as kind of drapes here, but had them turned into curtains. But it's just one of those things where it's just such a nice memory of a place that I really enjoyed. Something I've always loved Tuareg artwork. So I went to Agadez about 1.5 years ago just to try to find a saddle, because I've always loved these camel saddles and the detail. So I went up there. It took about a day to find a really good saddle, and then managed to carry it back to New Zealand. And then last September, I went to Dagestan to find this guy, because a lot of these craftsmen, the sad thing is with the craftsmen is that, there's no one else doing it. anymore. Young people everywhere just don't want to make stuff anymore. And I think a lot of this craft is going to be lost, and it's all just going to be turned into kind of cheap production. So this is maple wood, and there was an old guy in a little village called Unsikal in Dagestan who makes this stuff. And every single little piece of metal like this, you have to put a scratch in, put the metal in, hammer it about 10 times, sand it off, and there's just probably about 10,000, pieces of metal in this. So it was really cool. I turned up at the village, and they got the guy out of bed, and he's in his pajamas, and he showed us how he makes them, and the family made us all dinner. And then another particular thing I went looking for was backgammon boards. And this is a backgammon board from Syria. And so every little piece of this is hand carved camel bone. And again, it's one of these things where in the 1970s, people stopped using camel bone because rather than hand carving all these little tiny intricate bits, someone said, I'll just give you a piece of plastic that is always going to be the same shape. So the actual craftsmanship to make something like that, is basically lost. Because I think you'd need to. This board is made by a guy who got an award from the French in 1930 as the best maker of all time. And I met his grandson, and I said, "Look, I'm really excited about your granddad's work, and I'll take good care of it." So it's nice and safe here. Unfortunately, there's a lot of dust from the work, but there's kind of a reflective bottom so that you can see the bottom of the board. And then one of my favorite things was going to Goma, and I went out to see the gorillas, and I took a picture of one of the baby gorillas, and I loved him so much that I had him put in the bathroom here as a 4-meter high mosaic. So if I zoom in, you can actually see the size of the mosaic. So, and then mirrored so that it's kind of like Planet of the Apes, so I can have lots of people to talk to during lockdown, lots of monkeys to talk to, lots of gorillas to talk to. And then if you're in the shower, when you look, there's a mirror here so that you got them keeping an eye on you. So I love my gorilla. It's a very special piece with my messy bathroom. There's some other things I look for, like this. This is an instrument from West Timor by a guy called Jeremiah Pa, and he was sort of the best player of this sasando instrument, and he just passed away about a year ago. But the thing is that when I went to meet him and to find an instrument, people were saying, "Oh, look, here's this new one. We'll sell that to you." And anything that was old like this was literally in the firewood pile. And that's, again, a really sad thing about craftsmanship, is that not only is the skill being lost, but the actual artifacts are being lost, because if they don't have a utility, there isn't really that urge to keep things as being sentimental. And a lot of that is to do, obviously, with privilege, is if you've got space to put something that you don't actually use. We're lucky. So luckily I saved that. And I know something that Stefan was very interested in is a saxophone. It's actually made out of garbage, which is maybe the way of the future. And this is by a guy in Paraguay who, it took me three days to find him when I got to Paraguay. And the saxophone works. It's not just a artwork that's made out of coins. So he didn't really want to make any more junk saxophones, so he didn't want me to tell anyone where they're from. And then I think I better wrap up the tour, given the mess, unfortunately. Oh, sorry, that was from when I was a fashion designer. I did a runway show at New Zealand Fashion Week, and this is one of my models. And then it was turned into a charcoal sketch. A lovely piece from Guinea. I know a lot of people had bad experiences traveling in Guinea, but it was one of my favorites. And this amazing face, it's actually made of recycled fabrics, and it changes color when the light hits it. So it's got a really interesting sparkle to it. And the artist said, no, it's for the president's 60th anniversary of independence. I can't sell it. And it was sort of, I was using Google Translate, and it went on and on and on for like an hour and a half of me trying to buy it off the dude. Finally managed to commandeer it and hand carried it back through about 10 countries. But anyway, so like, I'm sorry, it's the timing with the renovation isn't ideal, but yeah, that's just sort of roughly what I've set up.
That is incredible. You haven't had a chance to see the comments flowing by. So I think when we have an EPS house party, you will get every possible vote. We're hoping to travel, and I don't know. You could list the shower with the gorillas and an Airbnb experiences, I suppose.
Yeah, without me in the shower as well, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
this is a safe space. Okay, it's
yeah.
very safe.
That's incredible. Thank you for showing us your home. We're all amazed, and we've all been educated as well. And that educational aspect is another one that I wanted to talk to, because I've said to people about my own travels to 193 that I feel like it's the most selfish thing I've ever done, and yet you found a way to turn it into a social purpose. So you've got this project, Touchable Earth. I'll share the link in the show notes. Talk about the inspiration and what people can do with it.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, when I sort of had an epiphany that I wanted to visit every country in the world, it was something which I wanted to do when I was a little kid. But then I'd spent a year traveling around the US and had seen most of what I wanted to see. And I had friend, I think it was a friend who posted that he was hiking in Burma or something. And if you'd asked me, I would have thought, I didn't even know you could go to Burma, let alone go hiking. And so I started thinking, how do you get to these places? What's going on? So I came up with the idea, and I was challenged through a conference called Asia Society to come up with a new idea. And this is just when iPads were taking off, digital technology is getting cheap, in terms of camera gear and sound gear. And I thought, well, when I was a little kid, I always wanted to know, what is a kid in another country like? And because at that time, you'd be the same. You'd have Encyclopedia Britannica, and you'd open it up, and there'd be a picture of a guy from Mali or something, and it's like a black and white photograph of someone, and it doesn't give you any context. So the idea was really simple. The idea was to say, what if we had kids in each place do a 20-second video teaching one aspect of their life, or sharing one aspect of their life, and basically put it in topics of their family, a game they play, their school day, or their culture. So it's never something that goes on and on, but you want kids that are elementary age, because that's when kids are most curious, and also they aren't self-conscious and they really want to share. So the idea, I did some experimenting, and the idea is you have a kid say, "Hi, my name's Stefan, I'm from here, and I want to tell you about my mom. My mom and I, we do this together," or something, because you want to show that relationship. And if they don't have money, then, like the girl in South Africa was like, "We like to sing songs together," and they sing a song, and you go, that relationship was just amazing. So I've shot 1,000 videos in 20 countries, and about half of the videos are online in a program called Touchable Earth. So you can use it on any browser. They're split up into topics. A lot of the videos were in English, but otherwise they're translated into English with subtitles, and all translated into French with subtitles. And the idea is that if you were, let's say you spoke French, but you want to learn English, when you turn it into French, you see the English next to it as well the whole time, so that you could kind of compare the languages. So the idea would be to add in probably Arabic, would be the next language to add in. But the program, it's one of these things where I need more kids using it, and I really think that it's important for kids, because primarily it promotes tolerance in gender, culture, and identity. And the reason I say that is the important thing from the start was to have an equal number of videos presented by girls as by boys. And that's because in most of the places I went, there were simply no educational resources that ever had a female narrative, or female as a protagonist or as a role model. And when you see girls use this, and they say, "I want to be, whatever, I want to be a doctor when I grow up," if they said that in their own classroom, they get laughed at. And I know that because I've seen it with my own eyes. And yet when they use the program, they just see another girl their own age on the other side of the world that they've never even heard of. saying the same thing, and you can see the impact on them, and it's really powerful. So I have a few promo videos I put up a way back of kids using it, and you can just see that everything they thought they knew, wasn't wrong, but they just didn't. They just realized it's like the penny is dropping on the video of them realizing that there is a whole nother world out there of kids just like them, and that's going to inspire that knowledge or that thirst for knowledge, and I think that's a really important thing.
It is incredible. And how do you fund this project?
So here I'm a defense lawyer in Auckland, in New Zealand. So the project's been entirely funded through my law practice, essentially. I had the odd person help out. I actually forgot to mention before, there was we raised some money for my school in Nepal, and there was a really nice organization here that put together a dinner. So we raised money and we rebuilt the school, and a few of my Facebook friends kicked in sort of $100 each. But otherwise, the program on the whole has just been funded, and that's sort of something which has always been where I don't want to lose editorial on it, because the moment someone's giving you money, they often have an agenda, especially if it's a big organization about, you can say this or you can't say that. So even making it in terms of the politics, I had I've got Iraqi Kurdistan as one of the places. So I try not to use the word country, because country just makes everyone go nuts. So I call it Iraqi Kurdistan, I call them places. And that way I was able to include a culture that doesn't have their own country, but has something unique to offer and amazing footage, and the kids were amazing, and basically showcase all of that.
Wow. So I've put your contact on Touchable Earth in the comments. I think if there's a lot of places, we won't say countries then, there's a lot of places out there that if we could expand the project and people could get involved, I think they should absolutely contact you. You've got a lot of people with interests that they share with you. So I think Tudor's certainly welcome to hearing from like-minded travelers and potentially getting involved. I'd like to see this cover the entire world, and it is an incredible experience, and it's easy to use. It's really inspiring. I was thinking that when I was growing up, most of the images I would see of children from some of the places you've already covered would be like in a charity fundraising video or a orphan adoption, making it look as sad and forlorn as possible. And here you show inspiring, motivated students, and I think the phrase you've used as family, school, play, and the culture is yes. a universal for children.
It is, and also the relationship between the kids and the parents. I think that was really important. I think it's just one of those things. I was somewhere, it might have been in Central Asia, and they said, oh, the bond between a father and his daughter is so special in sort of this area of the world. And I've got a beautiful video from Iraqi Kurdistan of the girl talking about her dad, and every day he comes home, she wants to give him a hug, and I was like, oh, well, here's a video from Guatemala, and here's a video from there and there. And if you took the text out, you wouldn't know where the videos are from, because the kids all say the same thing. They're all enthusiastic about life. And just to go back about, as you say, with all those charity videos, they're all terrible, because all of these kids have dignity, and all of these places have a dignity, and they're all, for pretty much all the kids, they're really proud where they're from, and they're proud who they are, and they're proud of their family, and they love it. And it's really just a sort of our Western way that, like, we're brought up. I was certainly brought up at the time where we're taught that all of these people are miserable, and they don't know they're miserable. And you go there and you think, well, isn't it cool to show that? And I had one teacher in the States who didn't like the India chapter because the kids were dressed too nice. And I was like, well, that's the whole thing, is that they don't live in slums. They live in like homes. Not all of the homes were amazing, but it was a home to them, and again, they've got their pride and dignity that they're showing. So that's the whole thing, is that there was never anything that was cut from it It was really just about showing, as I said to someone, I said, I don't care what they say, so long as they just say something. And
Mm.
if you think about it, especially in the US, I mean, if every kid in America watched 10 videos on Touchable Earth, just 10,
Hmm.
they would probably know 10 times more about the world than they do already from 10, 20-second videos. I mean, just to actually, one example I always like to give of content, it's like the girl from Iraqi Kurdistan, and I don't know what they're going to say when they start doing the video. And she's showing us her room and she's showing us her doll. And in the video, she says, "Oh, this is my doll, and I named her, I think it was Iwana or something." And she goes, "Oh, it's after my favorite person from Girls' Generation, which is a Korean pop band or something." And you're sitting there thinking, there is not, and I don't think I showed the news TVs here. I mean, I got 3 TVs streaming news 24/7. There has never been a single video showing that a kid in somewhere like Iraq, you know, is first of all not miserable, and second of all has an appreciation of the world, and likes Korean pop or something like this, and that's what she renamed her Barbie doll. And you just think it's just mind blowing, because that content, no, but that content does not exist. There is nowhere, anywhere ever. You will never get that shown on Fox or CNN because it doesn't fit their narrative. And that
Hmm.
was the cool thing, is that the videos, every video when I rewatch them, I'm still surprised when I watch them.
Fantastic. And the target age, I think, is elementary school, but
Yeah.
I'd say the real target age is anyone of any age can partake and enjoy and be inspired. So everybody do check out Touchable Earth. Let's let's traipse through some of your travels. It sounds like colonialism is a theme, and we don't shy away from tough issues and discussing tough issues responsibly. So I'm curious your thoughts on that big subject and how it relates to the travels you've experienced in the world you see.
What I'd say is, I mean, as I said before, I think the Cold War is really the overarching feature of places like Africa. The Cold War was just the worst. And I think when you had like all those countries in Africa becoming independent, it was the worst possible timing, because every country that had all this potential was then influenced by the Soviets, influenced by the Americans. Institutions never got to develop and everything, and that's just what we see today. So, yeah, colonialism, I don't think it's as big a deal as the Cold War. I think what I would like to talk about, sort of on that topic, is territories, because so many people traveling, we're obsessed with countries and the 193, and that's the goal, and everyone does that. And I
Hmm.
finished the 193 2 years ago, a year and a half ago,
Hmm.
and I had 6 months off. When I say off, I mean off airplanes. I was absolutely exhausted. Um, and I bought this place and then started renovating it. So it's been a 2-year project to get a little stuff done. And then I started visiting the territories, like basically the ISO recognized territories or whatnot. And I
Hmm.
have to say, the territories per square kilometer are way more interesting and fun and amazing than countries,
Hmm.
because a lot of countries really just exist because that's where someone just drew a line and just said we're just getting out of here, or there's a river and it was convenient.
Hmm.
But territories, every territory you go to, whether it's a Christmas Island, Cocos Island, St. Helena, um, are the standouts for me. Is the reason they're a territory is because either they're too small to be a country, or they're too important to the person who owns them to become a country. And
Hmm.
so they've got that. There's going to be a reason why they're still there, and why
Hmm.
they haven't been fobbed off into being a micronation. Um, and islands on the whole tend to just be crazy always because they're far away, and people act differently when they're on islands, especially little ones. Um, so I've really enjoyed the last trip I did, which before COVID was St. Helena Ascension Islands, and St. Helena was just mind-boggling. I mean, you've got all the Napoleon history.
Hmm.
It's the
Hmm.
second oldest. It's the second oldest British territory in the world after Bermuda, and they both have in common that they are in a strategic location on shipping routes. So you've just got, there's just so much happened there. You had the Boer prisoners, you had um, the Zulu prisoner, and just the ethnic group there, because they've been mixed race for 300 years. The people look different from anywhere else in the world. They sound different. Freediving was great. The Napoleon history was just endless. I mean, it's just one of those things where the only places I really seem to buy books about were territories. Um, and at Cocos Island, Christmas Island, I've just been reading a lot of books on the history of those. Um, and just in terms of craftsmen, I've got an 80-year-old Cocos Islander making me a knife because he's about the seventh generation knife maker. And I
Hmm.
don't think any of his sons make knives and hand carve them and everything. And I saw them, I was like, oh, please, can I get that for my house? And I thought he was going to make like a little one for me to cut cheese with. And they just sent me a photograph, and the blade is a foot long. So it's the sort of thing you'd used to. So it's basically the sort of thing you'd used to hack the head off a shark.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it's one of these things where you go to Cocos Islands and there's only 500 people on the island, but they're a unique, distinct ethnic group that even 40 years ago were being paid in plastic money by a mad Englishman who was the fifth generation who treated it like his own country. And you just think, you couldn't
Yeah,
make a
that's
movie
Australian
about this.
territory, right? I mean, not everybody's necessarily familiar with this. When I was there, it was explained to me like the Australians didn't know that essentially they had an effectively a slave plantation
Yeah.
on their in their territory, and then somebody from like the UN or whatever went there and said, a few decades ago, and said, by the way, did you guys know about this? And then there was a lot of covering
Well,
their
yeah,
back.
just to go back for the people listening so you understand this. So the islands are empty in 1820. You have a British guy turn up and turn it into a plantation for coconuts, brings in Malay workers, men to work. And he basically runs it like a normal plantation if you had slaves, and they can only, if you ever leave, you can never come back, and you get paid. I think at the time we would have just given them food effectively. Um, by the early 1900s, he gets coins made out of ivory plastic in England by a button maker, and he pays the workers in plastic buttons that they can only use at his store to buy things. So when the Australian government needs telegraph stations for strategy because it runs across the Indian Ocean, or airports, they pay him in hard currency, and then he pays the workers in plastic. And by the 1950s, he's got this machine that's like a token machine for a third-rate Nevada casino, to pump out the money. They can just pay people in the plastic, which is in the museum. And yeah, in the 1970s, I mean, this is an Australian territory where people have no labor rights at all, no other rights at all, no education, no health care. The UN turns up, the UN Decolonization Committee, and I'm like, hey, just checking it out. Is everyone happy? And of course, the guy's like, yeah, it's been great. Like, it's just fab. What's like, yeah, sure. And the guy even wears like a little knife and everything. And he wears all white clothes. It was just amazing. Um, and and same with Christmas Island at the time as well, where the Malay and the Chinese people were treated as third class citizens and they had no rights. Um, so basically, they said to the guy, look, we'll give you $6 million if you leave. And if you don't want to leave and you don't want the money, we'll just kick you off with no $1 million. So he's like, okay, I'll take the money. So they kicked him off. And his son, the sixth or seventh generation one, is still on the island. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet him. Um, but it's basically like having a private kingdom in a Western country as recently as the 1970s, where people were treated as like feudal slaves, and it's nuts. So the old guy has lived through all of this,
Mm.
and it was such an honor when he said, "Hey, I'll." It was actually through EPS. I think it was Austin had stayed with the family and hooked me up. Um, but just to have him making this incredible parang, this sword, and then I got one of the antique buttons, and that's being inset into the handle. the ivory button, and then there's a cabinet next to the fridge. It'll go into the cabinet, and then kind of ironically, that's the fish knife, and then I have a Faroese whaling knife to eat whale with. It's about 120 years old, but it's tiny. So the whale knife is tiny, and the fish knife is like I say, you'll cut like Gouda, like just just be. If anyone comes for cheese, it'll be fabulous. So Cocos Island again. I mean, there's not many countries of which you could walk around in what half an hour
Yeah.
that I could talk about all day, just everything because
Yeah.
it was so mind blowing history. But so many countries they just don't have that, and that's why there is a lot of strife in the country system we have now. Is because there isn't the borders are new and people don't really have anything in common. So no territories. I just say if anyone just decides that it's not that important, the UN 193, the territories have really they just don't disappoint.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of even places that might seem maybe less exotic in some ways or less unfamiliar, but a place like Madeira is so many elements of Portugal plus its own culture. I mean, I know it has a reputation for British pensioners complaining about, over flavored food or something, but as they hang out. But I just thought it was incredible to so much of Portugal in this tight package plus its own distinct place. And across Europe, many of my favorite destinations have been the islands, Faroe Islands, the Åland Archipelago, on and on. And I'm glad some of these travel lists have made me aware of them and experienced some of them. So yeah, a few of the comments are from Austin Fu, who you mentioned. I think he knows the backstory. Did you get the craft you were looking for from Nexu?
Yes. Yeah, Nexu is yeah, he just had a knee operation and so he had a few months off but I just got a picture 2 days ago of him crafting the sheath for the knife. That's how
Oh,
I
so
know how big the knife is because
okay, yeah.
he's sitting on the table. I had a cabinet made already. I thought it was going to be this big, you know. And I've got the picture and it's sort of I'll pop it up in the comments later so you can see the size of it. Yeah, but Nexu, I mean you have someone who is a living treasure and an embodiment of a microculture that only exists because of a crazy English guy who ran a
Yeah,
fiefdom and has now created a new culture called Cocos Malays. And if they go back to Malaysia, everyone in Malaysia knows they're a Cocos Malay. You know, they're like a separate entity. So no, I just like I say, it all comes in, Stefan, to that thing of saying, how do we find these craftsmen? You know, and there's a lot of searching around or asking people or whatnot to say there's got to be someone who makes, you know, those vases in Unsicle or someone who makes the knives or the backgammon boards or something. And yeah, tracking them down. And to me, that treasure hunting has actually been what really makes it a lot more fun than just going and just visiting a museum, but trying to find, you know, human treasure, trying to find these people where, you know, when they're gone, I think a lot of the craftsmanship and skill is going to be gone with them.
I think we need to create a resource or at least within EPS of craftsmen that you found and others. I guess in Paraguay, not necessarily wanting to be visited in that one case, but a number who certainly would welcome. And we can think about that. That's something that's certainly a gap in my travels. I've not focused that way, and I realize I should have been doing so. We've got a question from Redzwan. He says, "How are the whale sharks?" And I didn't specify where you've seen them. Did you see them in St. Helena recently, or where have you seen them?
Yeah, that was in. I was trying to see if I could plug my other phone in here. Um, yeah, in St. Helena was exceptional for whale sharks. So the time to see those are in February, and we basically jumped in a boat and went out looking for them for about half an hour and found I think two or three on one trip and one or two on the other. And the photography, I'll check it up in the in the comment section, just some of the pics because I'm still editing the pictures from St. Helena. But without question, those were great whale sharks because this was legit. It was out finding them as opposed to, you know, the Philippines where they're just sort of, you know, fed and hung out for the tourists. So I was interested in if it wasn't for all of this, I think whales it's not whale sharks, but whales in Mayotte and Comoros Islands in about September is usually pretty famous, and
Mm.
Niue in August, September, which I was looking forward to as well. But we might still be able to go to Niue. It's kind of part of New Zealand, or very close to New Zealand. But yeah, so I'll show you up some of the whale shark pictures in response to that.
Fantastic. And talk about underwater photography. What's your kit? What's the equipment you recommend? How does somebody begin to do this well?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing is I'm a free diver. I'm not a scuba diver. And when I want to take up underwater photography, there's pretty much well, there's not really it's very rare to have free divers to do underwater photography because obviously you've got a kit that you have to carry and it's heavy. So the big change or revolution was Sony making these mirrorless cameras. So anyone who does any point and shoot photography will know that you used to have a big DSLR to get a big sensor in it, and now you can get point and shoot cameras that are very small that have a really good sensor, and you can take a good picture. So when Sony created this little camera, it meant that they could make smaller cases, and then freediving photography became viable. So basically, I have a rig that's probably about as big as my fingers, like this. It's made by a company called Inon, which is Japanese, and it's all super lightweight material. And then the machine tooled aluminium case goes on it, so the camera fits in with no air bubbles, and then a strobe. And it's basically something that I can go down, use with one hand. It's not ideal with one hand, but I can use it with one hand and then surface, and there's not a lot of drag to it. So I've done the underwater photography in pretty much all of the islands that we've just mentioned. And I just take all the camera gear fits in the backpack because it fits in such a small case. 30 years ago, you would have needed a bag just for camera gear for the equivalent quality that you can get now and hold it. I mean, the big thing that changed with underwater photography is it's another craft that's going out because GoPros became so popular. Because if you have someone who only goes scuba diving once a year, and you're saying you're going to spend 2,000, even 3,000 on a rig, and if you have problems photographing above water, when you get underwater, you're going to have a whole nother level of issues, because you're going to have lighting issues and backscatter, which is all the plankton, and the fish don't stay still. It's not like photographing the family dog, it just stays there. The fish might just be there and go. So it's one of those things where unless you're passionate about it, it's very frustrating. And then you get a GoPro and you say to somebody, you can wave around a stick and get it and show all your friends, pop it straight onto your phone and show your friends, this is what I saw. It just totally changed the interest in it. So it means there's been a huge decrease. And I've just noticed when I go on diving trips, how rare it is to see anybody, even scuba divers, with a rig. But obviously GoPros are really toys. You're never going to get a real photograph because you need to have a strobe underwater. Because when you go down more than about 10 feet, the color red disappears. So that's why when you see these photos with all this incredible color in them, that's only because there's a strobe. Like when you're looking with your eyes, things don't look those colors. So sometimes you see everything and it just all looks sort of blue and green. And you take the picture and you look on your camera and it's like a rainbow. But that's not what you're looking at right in front of your face.
So we've got a question about the RX 100 from James, free diving, and he's never been able to properly aim the lens. He just pointed in the general direction and hopes something turns out.
Oh yeah, so that's the thing with underwater photography is you can't do zoom. So you have to be to get a photograph, even with the RX 100. The subject is ideally going to be within even, I would say, 30 centimeters. So it's not like normal photography. I mean, where you do maybe you can do a wide angle, but you won't have a subject in it. So when you see pictures of like a fish and the fish is big in the photograph, that photo was taken within a foot, because when you have a strobe and the light goes off, it's going to hit all of the plankton that's in the water and create lots of noise in the photograph, and that's called backscatter. And sometimes you'll have it. So if you're super close to the fish, there's no there is no backscatter because it's too close. But otherwise, to edit the underwater photography and take it out is a huge amount of work. So I think that's the problem with the camera is if you, I say, you need to be closer than you think, and you can't use the zoom function on the camera to answer that question.
It sounds like you need to be in places where there's not a lot of activity in the water as far as tourists and other divers. One that I know you've talked about as a great spot and one of my favorite places in the Caribbean. Although I didn't go on the water, I went up into the hills. Is Saba? Talk about that.
Yeah, so Saba is another example of an absolutely fascinating territory. Absolutely fascinating. It's one of the Netherlands. I hope I get it right now. Netherlands Antilles. I think it still is. There's been a lot of changes of the classifications. So Saba is interesting because it is like a cake tin. There's no beaches. It just goes straight up and down. It's one that struggled a lot with population and economy, and then they set up a medical school on it, and now there's 2,000 people on the island. 400 of them are to do the university, offshore university, and that brought in a lot of Americans. So now there's going to be, restaurants and bar scenes and employment for the other people. So the local people I spoke to, they basically said, look, they've never really had any trouble with the students, and everyone really likes them. So it's actually quite a rare example where I was expecting them to say, oh, they're drunk and they do all of this stuff. So the thing with Saba, you can fly to it only from St. Eustatius or from St. Martin. There's sort of like a little triangle way to get there. Or from St. Martin, there is a ferry a couple of days a week, I think, to get between them. And the runway is at the very bottom, and it's actually the shortest commercial runway in the world. So it's tiny. So you come in and you just almost land like a dump like this. Then you have to drive all the way up to the top and then back down the other side to the bottom. And it's just one of those things where you notice there wasn't garbage in the water. The fish and the creatures and the stingrays and the turtles were so tame. It was almost overwhelming, like when you take a photograph and everything is still sitting in front of you in the same photograph. So it was. I've visited all, I think it's 35 territories, including the sub territories in the Caribbean, and without question, Saba was absolutely the best for underwater. So I highly recommend that as a destination. And they're also famous for their lace. So they do have that craftsmanship of lace and spiced rum, Saba spiced rum. It's very sweet, but two more unique things to do if you go there.
Fantastic. And once I dig up the link, I'll put my own video of that runway and that approach. A lot of what they're called aviation geeks will fly to Saba just to experience. They call it like one of the most dangerous runways in the world, or that. I actually I videotaped my plane coming in, so I was way up on the hill and did a video of it, and then I had to run down before they would take off and leave without me. I ran into a cactus patch, and by the time I got to the plane, my leg was bleeding down the side, and they weren't too thrilled. But I have very happy memories of Saba, so that's a great recommendation, and I hope other travelers will get to experience that. Speaking of, I'm never too hesitant to admit where I know nothing. So I only learned about free diving actually in Nadi Airport in Fiji. I was heading to Tuvalu, but there was a guy sitting next to me with some really long fins that he was carrying on. And I said, why on earth do you have fins that long? What is it for? And that's all I still know about free diving. So is there a hierarchy or a rivalry between scuba and free diving? How does that all work?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, well, it's one of those things where, if you're a free diver, for me, I'm a purist, and it's an amazing experience. If you go deep, the deepest I've photographed is about 25 meters, so that's 75, 80 feet, and you're underwater for about 2 minutes, and you really, you're part of the ocean. Yeah, you're down there and you're with the fish, and it's a phenomenal experience. And if you do that for an hour, you're feeling pretty good. It's a great workout, so you feel good. and then you come back on the dive boat, and there'll just be lots of scuba divers, and they're all overweight, and then they're just smoking and everything. I think, oh God, just it's a little. So it's one of those things. I mean, scuba diving has really opened up tourism and everything to a lot of people who wouldn't normally do it, and obviously a lot of people who scuba dive don't do any other form of exercise or any other sports or anything. But it's good for the economies. But I just think the purity you get from the free diving, scuba diving in somewhere like Micronesia, where they have the wrecks of the Truck Lagoon, and that's where pretty much the whole Japanese fleet was bombed to pieces by the Americans in World War II. And it's got the most wrecks, the best wrecks in the world to dive on. Obviously, very sobering history, and
Mm-hmm.
people can dive into. If you're scuba diving, I always say to someone, if you scuba dive and you want to go to truck, just make sure that you are the highest certification and experience that you can be before you go to it, because it's just one of those things where it's not like a turn up and dive 20 meters and you see stuff. If you want to do the 60-meter dive and go inside the boat and see the tanks, that's something which you might as well delay that trip for a year and do some easier dives to build up, rather than go there and be disappointed that you couldn't see the pictures you saw on Instagram that someone else took. And there's just no way you can free dive that, to see those. So there are things that you miss out on at those depths. But most of the fish life and other things, they're all within 20 meters easily. Which, if you're a free diver, it's not that big a deal. So I mean, I
You
recommend it. Out of
free
purity,
diving for an hour is a good workout. I'm thinking, how many times are you diving in that hour, and how long are you staying down typically?
Let's say in an hour. So let's say if there's an average of, I reckon there'd probably be 20 free dives, because that's about a minute and maybe a minute and a half underwater and a minute and a half recovery going up and down. But I think Palau, I mean, it was one of those things where I say in the Caribbean, I'd have days where I took 2 or 3 photographs. There was
Mm-hmm.
nothing. And then in Micronesia, I took about 300 photographs in one day, because it was just so much to see. And that was really deep diving. And that's when I think I did 100 in a day. So it's like going 250, 2,500. What's that? It's like going up and down for 2 miles in a day, holding your breath. If you add it up, like it really.
I'm just trying to even how to compare
Really,
it. Have you run a marathon? What would be the on land? Is there any kind of equivalent of the exertion?
um, I don't know. I've never been a very good land person. I've just it's like, as I said to someone, if you saw me running in the wild, you would shoot me to put me out of my misery. You'd just be like, I don't want to see the lion eat the gazelle. You just sort of like, no, just no. So I can't really think of it. It's a beautiful sport, and it's just a wonderful way to see the world, and it's great. So I love it.
And what's the starting place for someone interested in learning about free diving or getting started?
I would say look and see if there's a local dive club to even start in a swimming pool to do it.
Mhm.
Because the hardest thing I think with freediving is if you're an adult and you start it, it's very, very difficult.
Mm.
Because if you like when you do it from when you're a kid, you don't
Mhm.
have that same appreciation of things like, oh, I got to pay my mortgage, so I can't die today, as you do when you're like 14. And it's like, oh, wow, how deep can I go?
Uh-huh.
So what I found is that, because I did it ever since I was a kid, you knew how long you could hold your breath for. And like if I told you to hold your breath now, you'd probably stop at, I don't know, whatever, 20, 30 seconds and go, I ran out of air. But if we actually sealed your mouth shut and your nose and everything, you could probably go twice as long and you would be totally fine. But that's not something as an adult that is easy to test
Mm.
rationally. But when you've done it your whole life, you know that even when you get that first inkling you want to breathe, I might get that at 30 seconds underwater, and I know that I've got at least a minute extra on top of that before it's even close to being a problem. So it's one of those things where I think you've got to just learn, just practice even on land so you don't drown. Holding your breath and understanding that you can actually hold it for longer than you think, and then just get water confident, um, and get into it. But I
No.
encourage it. Anyone who wants to do it, because the last point I'll make on the free diving, Stefan, is the state of the oceans is absolutely terrible. It's absolutely terrible, pretty much everywhere except for those incredibly remote places. And when I say so, I spoke to someone, actually, it was even in Palau, and there were two women on the boat I think they were from Chicago, and they're just on the boat. And we went out to the Jellyfish Lake and all these other things, and they're like, oh, we're not really confident we don't get in the water. And I thought, look, if you just look in the water and see that, in 10 years, there's probably not even going to be there. The way that the oceans are treated and the number of marine reserves in the Caribbean where people were fishing in them just totally openly. And the people at the resort said, if we actually told them to not fish there, they'll just come burn the resort down. So, and you just think, this is terrible. So it's one of those things where if you don't see it now, it's not like the Eiffel Tower, which probably will be there in 10 years. So it's good to get out there and do that. And maybe that'll even help aid conservation if more people are aware of what's in there. Because it's a fascinating 2/3 of the earth is water, right? So
yeah, I'm thinking of Cocos Keeling that you mentioned, and on the same day I'm on. And then there's very specific spots where you can get in the water, and then the other spots are where tiger shark thinks you're a turtle parts of it. So you have to follow the instructions very carefully. But I mean, one spot by one little I even forget the name. There's one little side island, and the water is maybe 3 feet deep, but I'm seeing octopus. I mean, all this stuff just around me. But then I get on the other side of the island, and it's entirely trash strewn from all the junk in the ocean, and that's facing the outside. And it would just look awful. Like those pictures of beaches in China where people are covering every dot of sand, except this is just piles of junk that's washed ashore. So yeah, when I see those stories, it does seem hopeless, but also whatever can be done. Are there causes or things other than trying to be a good citizen, trying to be a responsible traveler that you're familiar with that you could point people to?
I think along the way I've seen a few that work with it. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Specific. I mean, it's one of those things where there's a lot of people trying to do things, but it's such a big problem. Because the saddest thing is you've got one problem, and you've got, and I guess it's one of those things where it's like saying, how do you solve whatever climate change or environmental problems? And the reality is it's economic. And my concern with it is with the economic decline that we're looking at globally now, the interest in ecology is going to be zero, or closer to zero than it was before, because to go in and say, how do you stop plastic going in the oceans? Well, you just need to have, first of all, you need to have biodegradable packaging. And it's like, well, if someone was in New Zealand and they sell, like, the supermarkets now, you can't buy plastic bags. They give you these biodegradable ones, and they probably add on 10 cents to every time you go shopping. And that's not a big deal if you're in if you're in a Western country and you got money, but that 10 cents is a really big deal to someone else. So it's really sad being in some of those little Pacific islands and seeing the kids in particular throwing all their garbage right into the lagoon. And it's just heartbreaking. And the sad thing is like, I've got a photograph from one of them, and I won't say which one right now because I don't like to bag the place, but it was just such a pity because they had a beautiful lagoon. But there was a girl, she's probably about 15, and she just hurled this Coke bottle right into the ocean. And then this little girl just behind her does exactly the same thing. And I caught the photograph when she's let go of the bottle, and it's got her silhouetted with the sunset and the Coke bottle launching off. And you just think, this is where you live, but there's not really anywhere for them to put the Coke bottles. I mean, so it's one of those whole things where there needs to be a whole transformation of it. But it's for some of those Pacific islands just covered in garbage. It's really rare to see what we think about as postcard islands, unless you're at a resort where they have a guy goes out at 5 a.m. and literally picks it all up.
Yeah, and then some of these, for people that haven't been, you're talking about countries that can be 10, 20 feet wide at some parts. There's places like Tarawa that has such a trash problem where The land is really just the road and a little bit of grass on each side. It's that narrow in some areas. Let's talk a little bit. We'll close on something maybe a little more upbeat.
Well,
Burning
let's
Man,
go.
you've been twice.
Yeah, so I was going to say I've got a bail application in about 20 minutes to try to
Burning Man.
spring.
Yep. So we'll close with Burning Man.
Yeah, close to Burning Man. Then I got to try to spring this dude out of jail.
We'll
So
do that.
luckily the courts with this COVID are running on a lot of virtual appearances, which is just fantastic because it means I just got to I already put the shirt on to be safe, but I just got to whack a tie on and
Powdered wig
jacket.
Yeah.
No, we don't do wigs anymore. Those are long gone. I mean, if we did wigs, I probably would just not take it off. I just wear it all the time. I mean, I think they look great with the wool going down there. Oh, fabulous. Good in the rain as well. So Burning Man. So I think I said before, it's the only event that I've been to that I'd go. Well, it's the only one I went twice, and I'd still go again. But the problem was that I was so lucky to go in 2010 and be the last year that you could buy a ticket at the gate because I was so disorganized. I'd sort of seen something on CNN about it once before, and I thought, oh, Burning Man sounds fun. So I just rented a car and drove from San Francisco, loaded up with non-perishable things like Doritos and Gatorade or whatever. Bought the ticket at the gate, turned up thinking, oh, I'll just have an early night. Got there about midnight, and walk around. Of course, I'd turn up at night, and it's just craziness everywhere. And I don't think I went to bed until like 4 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. And it was just insane. Like I had no idea how big it was. I didn't realize that it's about 2 miles from one side to the other, just from the camp. It was so huge. It was freezing cold. So anyone listening, please understand that the desert is freezing cold at night. So I turned up in t-shirt and shorts because in the daytime it's 40 degrees or 100 Celsius Fahrenheit. But at night it was freezing, and luckily a bunch of people came up and they're like, "Man, unless you're taking a lot of acid, you're going to be really cold." I'm like, "Well, I'm not big on the acid, so I'm not really big on drugs." So that was what I said. The thing with Burning Man is it did have a reputation, for drugs. I'm not into drugs, and I thought it was fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And people don't usually drink too much alcohol either because you get dehydrated, and then it's going to be really hot. I'm not into dance parties either, but it was still fun. I just thought that it was really like being in an aquarium of a mix of artists and incredible engineers who've come together and just built amazing stuff. And you just walk around and just meet people and talk to them, and everyone's just really friendly. I thought it was just like you didn't really have to explain anything. I was riding on my bicycle because you need a bicycle. And I hadn't had a shower because you can only have a shower if you have a mat that it evaporates off because they don't want to have gray water going in the sand and ruining it and stuff. I'm just riding along on the bike, and all of a sudden I look up and there's just this kind of stage with a big plastic sheet in front of it. There must be floor to ceiling kind of height plastic sheet, and there's like 10 naked people standing behind it. And I thought, something good's happening there. So you just jump off the bike, just pull all your clothes off, run along the stage, run up the staircase, and then you're standing there, and all of a sudden this dude, and it was actually a good bet because this dude just comes out with this hose of foam, which is soap, sprays everyone down. They play some dance music. There's a foam party for about 2 minutes, and then the guy comes out with the hose and just hoses it all off. And I was like, well, that's my shower. How good was that? I don't have to go and clean it up afterwards. I just walk out of there and put your clothes on, get on the bike, and ride off into the desert. Now. And if that's not your vibe, you aren't going to have fun at Burning Man, and you really should learn to chill out a little bit. That's my advice to that one. But so thing is, Burning Man does require a lot of preparation. Especially, you need to find a camp really, so you got a little bit of support there because there'll be people who have camps where they have generators and fridges. Or I think on the second year, I had a buddy who had an RV that he had driven down from Canada, and I paid him just to sleep in the RV. Just because I wanted to not sleep in the back of my car again. So just things like that. So it's one of those things with a lot of information on preparing for it. I'm not sure, was it canceled this year? Have you seen it? I wouldn't be surprised if it was, actually. I don't think it would be too
And one
effective.
of the comments is supposed to go, don't know if it'll take place. So that I guess a
Right.
decision hasn't been made. Yeah, Denai, who will be joining us on Wednesday. But yeah, you've been to so many great events, the barbecue festival in the U.S., hot air balloons. It sounds like I need to see a lot more of the U.S. We got to get you back to court, so we'll hear more from you another time. But
Thanks.
what a privilege to have your home tour and learning about your travels and your world.
Cool. Well, thanks very much for having me on, Stefan. It's a real pleasure, especially with looking at the lineup of people you've interviewed lately. It's very flattering to be involved in that group. And thanks for your work with EPS because
Yeah.
I only joined EPS when I was, I think, 6 countries short of the UN,
Mm,
and nonetheless, there's definitely been some permanent friendships that I made through the group, and also some fantastic advice, like staying with Nexu and Cocos Islands would have just never would have happened otherwise.
mhm. Yeah, fantastic. And that's a hat tip to Austin in the comments, an island expert as well. Thank you for joining us today, Tudor.
Go. All right. See everybody.